Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of At Home with Holmes. Thank you, Maddie, for those hand gestures. And for you, the audience, joining us here today, this evening, morning, night, wherever you are. And so, as you know, we are housekeepers. And so we have some housekeeping before we get into this episode.
If you want to know, because you all do and have been asking, the secret to our intellect and our handsome good looks, there are 3 things you have to do. 1, touch nature. 2, consume good product. 3, wear good product. And how you can do this, and in this order, you start by going to Cabin on the Coulee, xotc.ca.
Where you can touch some grass.
Touch some grass, get into some nature. This is time to rejuvenate your soul. Our family does this once a year. It is rated #1 farm stay in Canada, according to TripAdvisor. And so go to xotc.ca, and this is where you can go to these central Alberta glam sites with your family.
Yeah, it is between May to November, and people are already booking vacations, so guys, make sure to book in advance. And if you go on that website, you'll see that you have the selection between the cabin, which holds 6 guests, 3 bedrooms, and 4 beds. You also have the Coulee Yurt, which holds 5 guests, 3 bedrooms, 3 beds. And then last but not least, the Grouse House, which holds 4 guests, 1 bedroom, and 2 beds. All the photos are online, and the cabin and the Grouse House are pet friendly. The Coulee Yurt is not. But again, go to xotc.ca to check those guys out, and then you can go to their Substack, Cabin on the Coulee Farm, to get updates on the family and the business and any updates. And if you scroll down, you'll see, oh, these 2 lovely people, or 3 lovely people. You'll see the owner of the business, Eric, interviewing me and Maddie when we were at Cornerstone. And if you hadn't noticed those beautiful garments that we are wearing,
you can buy a beautiful garment on our Buy Me a Coffee. This is step 2. You can buy us a matcha on the homepage, because that's how you be healthy. This is the second thing you need to do to get our intellect. And if on the far right, you can see shop. That's how you get the 3rd and final step, which is beautiful garments, the Alberta jerseys.
And what is it that Jordan Peterson says? He says you got to dress up like you actually care about yourself. Mm-hmm. And not only do we dress like we care about ourselves, but you and us, we all can dress like we care about our nation, which we do. I am not joking about that. I'm just having fun.
And you can buy more than one if you want to spread the love to family members. Makes good gifts. When you buy it, it'll do a little pop-up message for you to send me your size, so I know what to send you.
Yep. So again, if you want to achieve our lovely intellect and handsomeness, then check out Cabin on the Coulee Farm, buy me a coffee, aka matcha, and support us by shopping for a jersey and support Alberta that way. So thank you guys for listening to our little segment, and without further ado, we can get on with the episode.
Alrighty, hello everybody. Welcome back to another episode of At Home with Holmes. This is our favorite series thus far, and that's not just because we're getting really intelligent people to join us.
That's precisely why we're getting really.
That's entirely why.
That's why I'm here, and I'm just
And this is part 4 of our series, Whose Battlefield Are We On? Change the Axioms. And today we have back on Miss Colonel Towner Watkins, because you can't get enough of her and her knowledge. We were actually just joking around earlier how some people, you know, when you're podcasting, they got notes out, and Colonel Towner's like, notes? What notes? Just because of how fantabulous her pattern recognition is, as she says on all of her podcasts. And so she can really just recite after her personal experience in the military. And then all the research, she's like, oh yeah, all these strings, they're there. She
Human
can see
encyclopedia.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah, there's no such thing as coincidences.
Yes. And so the reason we have her back on today is because we wanted, in our first episode with her, we did touch on broadly Gladio to introduce people to the reality about the foreign interference, which is also domestic interference via foreign entities. But this time we wanted to hone it in a bit closer to home for everybody because, you know, as we are Albertans, but we also, Alberta is within Canada for the time being. Mm-hmm. And with that, Gladio is very a part of Canada. We are not just, you know, left out of that dark entity. And so we wanted to bring Gladio home? And is it home? Where is it? How is it played out? This way, because some people here in Alberta, they're very attached still to the Canadian identity. And the reason that my family sees it a little bit different is because we've been listening to people like Colonel Towner Watkins and Matthew Arid and Cynthia Chung. And so we have a different idea about what Canada looks like in the Canadian identity, because we know what the Canadian country has been brought into and the operations that hasn't been involved with. And one of the big revelations that my family has heard Colonel Towner Watkins reiterate on her recent podcasts, including the ones that she did with Joaquin Flores, which were absolutely brilliant, is the fact that you can't be a part of NATO, for example, without having a Gladio cell within your country. And so if you recall that the conversations that we had about Gladio and their goal to have paramilitary and then parafinance and all of these things, note that Canada, also a part of NATO, we have and are obligated to have some sort of Gladio units within here. And so the question is, okay, if we have these Gladio units within Canada, what have they done in the past and how are they implementing, so we can start keeping our head on a swivel and hopefully in Alberta not do the same thing if we become an independent country. So Dad, any other context you'd like to give to the viewers?
Just the why are we having conversations like this? And although our audience is not strictly Alberta, we are in a very unique place. A member that Towner Watkins has spoken with is Lieutenant Stephen Colonel Murray, and he made a statement on the Sean Newman podcast that has always sat with me. Right. And he said, you do realize you're trying to leave the Commonwealth. And this is very important because think of this like an abusive husband. The lady doesn't just get to bounce. It isn't that simple. And so we have historical precedents that, if, for example, the FLQ crisis in the 70s, where, there's Pierre Trudeau getting to launch the War Measures Act upon his own citizens and clean up any of his opponents in the political theater. But that was really an Operation Gladio. Like, that was the RCMP setting up letter bombs, harming its own citizens. They got caught. Then all of a sudden they're like, oh, my bad. Okay, well, just like Operation Mockingbird, we're going to stop doing this now. And then they set up CSIS.
Rebrand.
Okay, so it's, like in my mind, it's like the RCMP, they say an oath to the crown, not the people. CSIS, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't even work for the institution or country that is Canada. Not for the people. That's for damn sure. So we're bringing Towner Watkins' expertise into this matter. Full disclosure, we're also hoping to marry this with Cynthia Chung to add a little more of the Canadian perspective. But I still believe that this is going to land. We want to give our citizens and our fellow Albertans the keys to understanding the magic trick. So that way you don't get fooled when the trick gets played, because make no mistake, we're going for independence. The government of Canada and its intelligence agencies have no intentions of letting us go. And if the speech of Patrick Henry to the Virginia Congress in 1775 allows us to understand anything, is that the opponent that we're up against forces you by legislating you into criminality, and then it sends its dogs upon you.
Yeah, and one more comment on that, because you alluded to the RCMP swearing the oath to the crown. Macy and I just recently attended a UCP youth gala where we got to, I don't want to say we, some of the youth with approved questions, because Macy and I did submit questions, but they must have been too controversial to get posed. Got to ask Danielle Smith a question. So it was a dinner with the premier and a bunch of, conservative campus youth from the universities and outside of universities. There were actually high school students there as well. And kudos on them for getting involved that early. But one of the things that she said is that I swear my oath not to Mark Carney, I swear it to the crown. She knows. And all of the people that make the oath, they know. They're swearing to the crown. And she said, the way Canada works, and in their brain it works because they are okay with swearing the oath to the crown and not the people. And this is something that I think with the Alberta identity and this Alberta movement, there's a divide in loyalty that's going on right now. A lot of the Albertan independent movement advocates, they are now loyal not to the crown, they are loyal to fellow Albertans, the plebs on the ground that are facing all the financial hardships with one another. That's where the loyalties have shifted. And if you are not in favor of independence, a question you have to ask yourself is it because you're loyal to the crown? Because that's who all of the advocates, Daniel Smith, that's who
your elected
caucus,
officials are
your
loyal
elected
to.
officials are loyal to that. Are you? If not, what are you loyal to? It's a question that should be asked because there's clearly a divide, and the people that are the elected officials in the caucus, they know and they're okay with it. So Canada and its constitution is working exactly how it's supposed to, which is not in favor of the citizens, it's in favor of the crown. It's stated in the BNA Act, and it's just passed on.
Transitioned?
Transitioned basically into the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So extra context for people to consider when, looking at this bigger picture game.
There's elaborate planning with people with guns and handcuffs, and they're coming. So, go ahead, Ken Watkins.
That's been the case in the past. That's definitely been the case in the past.
So
what's interesting to me, listening to you guys describe the situation, you are where America was in 1775.
Yes.
Yes.
you were once British subjects too. So technically speaking, we are exactly the same peoples as you are.
Mm-hmm.
Except you have a Second Amendment.
No, that's a really good point, because there's a lot of rhetoric and calumny against Americans. To rally around Mark Carney, they went against Trump, and even now, elbows up, they go against America. America is this big baddie, and one of the things that people seemingly say when you ask them, and I've heard this from a lot of Alberta independent advocates, they've gone and asked people, so you're not in favor of independence, how come? They say, well, I don't want to be America. So it's not even in favor of any identity here, but they don't want to be whatever they've been told is the United States, and whatever media they're watching is painting this picture and this narrative. And we, having read, the grievances and the Constitution, knowing the story of people like Patrick Henry, Ben Franklin, and the fight for 1776, we know we are you. But a lot of Canadians like to paint this divide as if we're completely separate entities. But a lot of the rural people that are in favor of independence, they have American, family and stuff. And that's one of the reasons why they can cross that division, and they don't paint Americans and Canadians as some separate entity.
Well, what's interesting about that comparison is the United States is not the only country that is no longer a British colony. So do you not want to be India? Do you not want to be Guyana? Do you not want to be, you can name any former British colony, and there's a reason why each and every one of them decided not to be a British colony anymore.
Right.
And in 2026, for Canada to basically still be a British colony is bizarre. It really is. If you want to be a country, why are you swearing allegiance to a crown that doesn't exist in your country?
Mm-hmm.
Canada?
The landmass belongs to the crown.
That's what I'm saying. So if you don't have a king of Canada, you are not a country, you're a colony.
Right.
You are swearing allegiance to a government that is not even attached, nor does it reside in Canada. So how do you consider yourself a country when you are still swearing allegiance to a foreign power, which makes you a colony?
And we have historical precedent too of the Privy Council overrides the Prime Minister. That we have an example of that because Australia's Prime Minister got ousted by its Privy Council.
Are you talking about Whittam?
Yeah, like back in the day when they pitched, that was the Privy Council that pitched that Prime Minister.
Well, that actually was a CIA coup.
Mm. Do tell.
Oh, so the Privy Council works in conjunction with the CIA? Surprise,
So
surprise.
if you go back and you research that particular event, the Whittam did not want. So, do you guys know what Pine Gap is?
No.
No.
Pine Gap was pitched to the Australians as a U.S. military installation, and that they were going to do military things. It was actually a CIA operation that had like the entire southern hemisphere under satellite control, and it was all going to be orchestrated out of Australia. And Pine Gap went live in 1962, and Whittam knew that it was not a military installation, and he made it known during his campaign that he wanted Pine Gap closed. He did not want to be part of this enterprise. And there were a lot of shenanigans with accusations about budgets, and they set up his chief financial officer, blah, blah, blah. And to your point, they basically ousted him because the Crown was not going to give up control of the intelligence that was gathered at Pine Gap,
Right.
because it supported Five Eyes. And so if you are the Prime Minister of Australia and you make any gestures about Pine Gap at all, you will not be the Prime Minister, period. So again, you have outside forces determining how your country is controlled. You are not a country by definition. You're a colony of some other country. If they can tell you who you can have as a leader in your country, then you're not in charge of your country, not as the people, and not even as the government. You don't have a sovereign government if it has to ask permission. And one of the basic tenets of a country is having a sovereign government.
Yeah, the thing that I'm curious about then when it comes to the sort of coups, because when we learned in our last episode with Colonel Tanner and with you yourself, is that we were establishing that they do these sort of coups through Operation Gladio type tactics and through the intelligence agencies. And one of the biggest things that I think the connection between intelligence agencies in the police force. And so what is kind of your assessment of that? Because I was actually curious, and you, whether or not you can speak this or not, of whether or not Camp X, the RCMP, CSIS in Canada, and there might be parallel examples that you can actually allude to if you don't have the specifics on that, but of how those intermesh when it comes to these sort of coup operations and getting rid of specific, like, prime ministers, for example.
Well, let's look at a couple of them. One of the most well-documented ones was the overthrow of the Chilean government, Salvador Allende. Now, the way they do this is they go in through, to your point, as far as the local police, they will, Salvador Allende had ran for president prior, and he was deemed absolutely not, he cannot be president. So they thwarted his first campaign through a lot of nefarious things. So they go in and they infiltrate your police, they infiltrate your military, they infiltrate, if you have a National Guard, they infiltrate all of those things. They try to buy the senators, they try to buy the politicians. I knew that in Italy in 1948, the CIA had spent $35 million buying votes in Italy to get the pro-NATO first prime minister post Mussolini in office, because the other guy didn't want to be in NATO.
Right.
In the 10-year period in the 1960s to the 1970s, they spent $60 million buying politicians in Italy. So this is a very common thing for intelligence services. And it's not just the CIA. I focus on them, obviously, because I'm an American, but the MI6 does the exact same thing. The German, they have a new name for them, but it was the BND. They do the same thing. This is all intelligence services.
Is that the Bundestag? No.
What? Well, no, that's their
government. That's their parliament,
that's
right?
their government.
Okay.
The B and D has a very long, very hard to pronounce.
Okay.
None of us are German.
Yeah. Gotcha.
But in the Chilean case, they actually went in and tried to take over the military in the run-up to the presidential election. And the senior general was very dedicated to Salvador Allende, so he got assassinated. We take him out.
Right.
We promote this other guy, Pinochet, up into a viable position, and we destabilize. We buy one of their equivalent of the New York Times was owned through a proxy by the CIA. So we're going to control the media. And it didn't work. Salvador Allende still got elected, and they have a parliamentary type system. And so he had to be confirmed by the Senate. So then they do this all out push to buy all the senators. That didn't work. They still confirmed him. So he takes office. And then there's just like all out war. USAID goes in, they set up a thing called the Office of Public Safety, and it basically starts infiltrating the local police and the army. And they have an entity called the Office of Transition Initiatives, which means we're going to transition you from a democracy to a dictatorship ran by somebody out of the military of our choosing. Unlike their entire advertisement is, we help them transition to democracies. But the democratically elected president that you're going to assassinate and you're going to install a military dictatorship in. And they do all of this under the guise of democracy. And so there's plenty of examples. And then once they have their dictator in charge, there's a lot of dissidents now that are pissed off that you just killed their president that they all just elected, right? So those people are now going to be called guerrillas. They're just patriots that want their president back alive. And they don't want to live under a military dictator that the CIA picked out.
Yeah.
And so but it's the words are very, you have to understand that labeling things is so critically important because it's control of conversations, it's control of words. And so they are now guerrillas. The patriots are going to be called guerrillas, just like the patriots here were called domestic terrorists. It's all very important labeling after January 6th. And so you have the guerrillas. And now we're going to say, because we labeled Salvador Allende a communist in order to use covert actions. He was not a communist. He was not in touch with the communist government. They just didn't like him because he was going to nationalize the copper, because the Freeport Mining and Anaconda Mining, who had the mining contracts in Chile, was paying the workers like $1.86 a day. They were basically starving, and they worked in horrendous conditions. And you're not allowed to unionize either. If you try to unionize, there's a pot of money in Washington that they infiltrate the unions and create chaos. They will start shooting people and then blame it on the guerrillas or the communists and label all of your labor unions communist. And so you're not allowed to do that. And there was a telephone and telegraph company, ITT, that Salvador Allende knew was spying on the Chilean government through the use of this telephone system and sharing it with the CIA. And so he was going to nationalize their telephone company.
Wow.
And and you're not allowed to do that either. And so this was in 1972-ish. And so all of these companies that were doing business in nefarious business in Chile went to President Nixon and said, we will pay you to get rid of him. They literally offered him like $200,000 to pay for the coup. And so anyway, he's couped. The Office of Public Safety goes in. They set up a thing called the DINA, which was basically their terrorist organization, completely trained and funded by the CIA. And the DINA goes out and starts arresting all of the guerrillas and putting them in black site prisons, torturing them to rat out their neighbors. And, they live under a dictatorship. People are disappeared. You never see them again after they're taken to these black site prisons. And this overarching program in South America was called Operation Condor. And I call it the kissing cousin of Gladio in Europe, because it was ran exactly like that. And as a matter of fact, many of the places, like in Chile, they had a thing called the Colony of Dignity. It was a black site prison where they tortured people. And it was created by a literal Nazi pedophile who had transported children from Germany to Chile and set up this compound that had vicious dogs running around it, guarding it, and this massive pedophilia thing going on down there. And so these things are all very real. And that's just one example. They basically did the same thing in Brazil. They did it in Argentina. They did it in Guatemala. And so if you start looking at the way these operations run, that's how they're ran. And to your point about the police, so even in America, the CIA by law is not allowed to operate in America. They had an entire unit embedded in the LAPD. They had people, Miami police, because that's where one of their major drug operations was ran out of. They had people in the Miami police on their payroll. They had reporters in the Miami Herald on their payroll. And a lot of this got revealed in the mid 1970s. Nobody went to jail. So why would they not keep doing it? You find there were CIA agents in the FBI. They were in the DEA. They had an actual cell in the DEA, an entire cell of CIA people, because if you're going to run drugs, you have to be in control of the DEA, because they're going to pick your guys up every once in a while, right? And also, if you have competitors, you want them picked up because they're outside your control. You're not making bank off of their drug sales. So you're free to go pick them up. You're just not allowed to pick these guys up. And so they infiltrate at every level. I was shocked by the amount of military interactions. At one point there was like, I think at one point there were like 700 military people that were attached to the CIA in the United States.
That's a lot.
Wow.
That's a lot. And then you also find people like General Ed Lansdale, who his entire career was working with the CIA. He was wearing a uniform. He was not military. And there's lots of them.
Well, no, wasn't that I was listening to a podcast with you and I think Ian Burlingame, I think it was on the Tommy podcast, and you were talking about I think it was the JFK assassination. You'd said like 44, 48 of the men in the police were a member of that
488 military intelligence.
Yes.
So it was 50% is the figure that most people use. 50% of the Dallas police officers were member of the 488th military intelligence unit that was set up just outside of Dallas.
Yeah, so the connection between the military, the police, and the intelligence and it goes back all the way to Rome too, because you even look at the Praetorian Guards. Like, you couldn't be a Praetorian member if you weren't a member of the
Cult of Mithra.
The Cult of Mithra. So again, the Mithra cult, yes, it's, this ideological cult, but that was also an intelligence cult. And then in order to be a Praetorian Guard, which is like the military and the police, you had to be a part of that. So that's a very, very old trick. And it's not just this new nefarious entity. It's a very old idea in order to maintain control and influence on all of your subjects and the foreign entities in order to do these operations.
Yes, and that's why I refer to the intelligence at large. So you have, the dad, MI6, and then you have all the siblings of all the post-World War II Central Intelligence agencies around the world as siblings. And they are the Praetorian Guard for the oligarchs. They don't work for the governments. There's example after example where a president will say, hey, I don't think we ought to do this, and the CIA does it anyway.
Right.
And so they don't work for the president. They don't ask for permission in many cases to do whatever it is they're going to do. And there's some built-in plausible deniability where a president will go, yeah, I don't really want to know. Every one of them runs it differently. They will have somebody that sits on the National Security Council that is a runner to the president. So the president can't say he was ever in the room, but he still knows everything that's going on. There's those types of things. But then you have presidents like Eisenhower that wanted to hear all of it. He loved it. He loved overthrowing foreign governments like Iran and Guatemala and the Congo. And
isn't it kind of funny that we get told that Eisenhower was trying to warn us, just like people think that when you read 1984 that was supposed to be some sort of warning. I was like, no, that's a rubric, people. That wasn't a warning. That was a rubric. He was telling you this is what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I view Eisenhower after learning the real story of Eisenhower, not the military myth that we learned in professional military education. He loved being the lapdog of the oligarchs and doing whatever it was. As a matter of fact, at one point, one of the guys, Gordon Gray, approaches Eisenhower and says, I really think you need to get rid of Allen Dulles. And he looked at him and said, I can't.
Wow. Who do you work for? Oh my gosh.
So if you go back and you realize that it was John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles that basically recruited Eisenhower to the Republican ticket, because Truman was trying to recruit him to the Democrat Party, because he had never actually affiliated with either one of them. And it was the Rockefeller push of the Dulles brothers that convinced him that that was the ticket that he wanted. And then his staff got dictated to him by the Rockefeller mafia, as well as the rest of them. You have the Whitneys and all of the other ones, JP Morgans and all of that other stuff. But that stuff gets dictated to them. And it is what it is.
I love the parallels here. Like, this is funny. We were like wanting to go with Canada, but at the same time, like, you painting the parallels between America and how they got co-opted is really helpful, because Canada's in the same boat essentially. Because with North America, like, a lot of it springing, as you said, father is MI6, right? It's like with a lot of it coming down from like sort of the dad and then consequently from these think tank groups, right, of oligarchs that you're saying they work for them. And if you wanted to paint a sort of hierarchy in the mind, right, that is interesting when you're like, I was trying to also, like, it was funny, I went down a Gladio little rant for a lady my age that I met at that same Daniel Smith gala, because I just was explaining it to her. And I was finding is, because we're in the West, right, and we're in the sort of, I guess, society that thinks that they're the ones that are providing the democracy, right? Because we're almost like the HQ, right? We're not like in those other countries. It's funny that you mentioned that some of the people that were recognizing that they need to like stand up and such, and that, oh, clearly you killed not our dictator as you're claiming them to be, you killed like our leader and we elected them. Like, what are you doing, right? That's less as overt here as it is maybe potentially to in other countries, that they may or may not, like, they might see it a little bit better than even we would see it here at home, because we're the ones painted as if we're the saviors, right? It's not necessarily like there's other countries right now that are saying they're going to come save us, right? And so then we have to navigate that storm. It's, we're the ones that are the good guys, always, constantly, always fed that narrative, right? And so the parallels that I'm seeing when you're talking about these stories is, you were like, then there's the siblings, right? And so like that might be an offshoot of the CIA, for example. And so from just like my research and, or I guess our research, and even in some of the stuff with Matt and Cynthia, for example, they were mentioning how when it came to like the British Secret Services and then the OSS, that transitioned into what became Camp X. So again, these siblings, the Camp X, that became the kind of thing that helped like spring forward the CIA, right? And so I'm like, so in Canada, when I'm listening to you give us these examples, these historical examples. I'm like, it's no different here. And as you were saying, they don't work for our governments at all. If anything, our governments are working for the intelligence agencies who are working for the oligarchs, right? And so, yes,
your government is a figurehead to keep you placated.
Yeah. That's what it feels like, because even with Mark Carney, for example, coming in, it was one of those, where did this guy come from all of a sudden, right? It's not like he sprang out of nowhere. And then we were looking as a family going like, that is selection, that's not election, because he's from the Bilderberg Group, Club of Rome, Chatham House. And then Maurice Strom was the one that kind of like brought him forward, like my little pupil or whatever, and was also a huge participant in the bringing forth of Klaus Schwab as well, and the WEF. And I believe, I haven't done as much research as maybe like Dad has, in the Stephen Harper also being a WEF affiliated. And so when you're seeing that, like, on either side, they're affiliated with these think tanks that are the ones that are, I guess, sort of have their hands in the CIA, in, as we were saying with the FLQ example, in the RCMP, which later had to rebrand as CSIS. It's like, it's the same playbook happening here in Canada as well.
So if your leader, your president, your prime minister, whatever, is not being attacked, he's one of them.
Absolutely.
So just like Viktor Orban in Hungary, attacked constantly, he's not one of them. Donald Trump, constantly under attack, he's not one of them. Bukele in El Salvador, constantly under attack by them, he's not one of them. That's the true measure of whether your government is controlled or not controlled.
The ones that have been successful that they've wiped out, I mean, like, I think Mbarak was someone that got the script flipped on him, if I'm not mistaken. Same with Gaddafi. Some could even argue Saddam Hussein, because he got played by both sides, and then they extinguished him as well. And also, I mean,
Saddam Hussein, and that's a very interesting story, because you see this play out too. Saddam Hussein, the overthrow of the government in Iraq and the installation of the Ba'ath Party was a CIA operation. As a matter of fact, I just wrote an article. What was that guy's name? I've got it up here somewhere. Critchfield. Critchfield was involved with that. He was a CIA operative. He was also involved 10 years before the overthrow and the installation of the Ba'ath Party in Iraq. He worked for...
Hello.
Sorry about
that. I was like, is that our end?
He worked for Kermit Roosevelt and helped overthrow the Iran government of Mossadegh in 1953. So that would have been 63 when they installed the Ba'ath Party. So what the CIA does when they have a dictator, because they want to keep them as long as they can, they generally have an alternative in the wings. So if this guy gets, too big for his britches or whatever, we've got this other guy. And so Saddam Hussein provided a useful stooge for them for a very long time. But they did have somebody in the wings, and I don't remember his name, but he was the Minister of Defense. And Saddam Hussein found out that he had a very cozy relationship, undisclosed, with the CIA, and he killed him. So he was like, no, you're not taking me out, because I'm taking out my replacement. And those are the kind of the nefarious games that gets played at that level. And so obviously we were basically funding the Iran-Iraq war, while at the same time we've got missile cells routed through Israel to Iran. We're basically supplying Iraq with so it's like funding both sides of these conflicts, kill as many. And there were people in the US government that was saying, just let them kill as many of each other as they want to. Because they don't.
That sounds like British foreign policy to me.
Yeah, they literally don't care about humanity, or they wouldn't be doing any of this. And so the same thing happened in Cuba. You found CIA operatives so they couped the Cuban government and installed Batista. He's a military dictator. And, the CIA, the mafia, everybody's in Cuba. US is down there, United Fruit's down there, everybody's down there. And they're exploiting the hell out of the island. Nobody of the large majority of the utility functions of Cuba was owned by U.S. corporations. William Pauly was one of the big guys. He owned the airline, he owned the bus transportation, he owned a bunch of sugar plantations, blah, blah, blah. And so United Fruit owned a bunch of their, and then there was mining companies and an oil company, blah, blah, blah. So it's corrupt as hell down there. People are being exploited. So you get this rebellious movement by the Castro brothers, and eventually Che Guevara comes into the scene, and they're training rebel forces up in the mountains. Well, the CIA goes in because they're going to try to co-opt that movement, right? So that if they're successful, they're going to have their embeds in that movement, because Batista, frankly, is getting a little old as far as all of his shenanigans. And they realize there's a genuine revolution spirit developing. So we're going to need to control both sides here. So we will supply Batista with all of his weapons and stuff like that in hopes he survives. But just in case, we're going to put some feathers over here in this nest too. What they found out, though, was that Castro was not corruptible and wasn't going to get bought off and be their favored new dictator. And that's when all hell broke loose. And that's when he became a communist, and they started all of the assassination attempts. And what most people don't understand is when you decide to stand up against the machine, and the machine being the US and the oligarchs here, at that time in the 1960s, the only country that had the wherewithal to not care what the US thought was the Soviet Union. And so by default, if you were a target, whether you were in Chile, the Congo, or wherever, Iran, there's only one other place that you can get weapons and help, and that's the Soviet Union. And as soon as they picked up the phone call, that phone call,
they hate competition.
Yeah, you automatically got labeled a communist, and then all hell broke loose. Not that it wasn't already breaking loose, but now we've got the little shiny ticket here that you're a communist. And let's put that hammer and sickle on your forehead. And so now you can open all avenues of attack, economically, politically, and militarily. And that's basically how these things go down. And that's, to me, the caution for you guys is, as soon as you have a viable independent movement, they will try to infiltrate it. They will try to create havoc at gatherings to make you be labeled as a terrorist, because that's just what they do. And there's so many examples of it.
So to play off a little bit, to bring what you just said back into the Alberta atmosphere. So you had earlier talked about election interference. That's clearly something that's in the best interests of these organizations in operation. And just so that you have context, Colonel Towner, because one of the reasons why we want the guests from the United States, tomorrow we're going to have an interview with Crypto Rich, is we want as much of the world to see and know what's going on, because one of the key sentences in Patrick Henry's address is that we have a righteous fight in front of us and friends will come. Now, I know that he was also alluding to faith, because that was a big part of the culture at that time. But there were, like, the United States, or the pre-states, like, while the colonies, they weren't an island unto themselves. There was help that allowed for that whole thing to happen. And we want the same thing, because even right now we have, the world is seeing that we got the necessary signatures for us to be able to have the question put to a referendum. And then right away we have a special interest group, and it's to me, it's a divide and conquer strategy, because they're trying to get native bands to be the marcher lord against the movement. that then will get the movement upset with natives, which I see right through that, and I have no intentions of playing that game whatsoever. There are interest groups in the hierarchy of the native bands and the reserve structures of the chiefs that are easily, you can start to trace where the corruption is for them. And even when you read their treaties, they're incentivized to take money from the government, and then they gotta play ball, so to speak. So I see they've had it so that Elections Alberta can't they can't verify the signatures now. This injunction that's been done. And so for a lot of people, it was like a sensation of having the wind taken out of their sails, where it's like all this hard work, all these people that are out in the cold and the snow and all the trials that we've had to try to garner the interest of Alberta citizens to at least ask the question, because that's all this is, right? And you need the signatures verified. So now they're trying to take away one of the avenues for us to be able to do this. Nice thing is this was we understood that this was coming, because we do have people that understand who our true enemy is with regards to what it is that we're attempting to do. So that's already a checklist of what you listed off. You said that they disguise as the Office of Public Safety. So we have this Online Harms Act that's going on in Canada, and we've got the Bill C9, which is going to be a way of censoring and limiting internet capability, another way of helping bring in digital ID, but it's also to stop the voices such as ourselves even from being able to share the message, to actually have the open conversation, because we're bipartisan. My family, like, we help in political parties, but it's mainly because we're people oriented. So, there are people that have their axioms, their ideologies in believing that the party system will work. And it's like, we don't believe that, but we believe people will. We believe, so it's like, you kind of have to get involved with them to show good faith, and that you believe in them more than you believe in this party system. So I see that Office of Public Safety, they're trying to use safety through legislation in Ottawa that's basically just going to remove guys like Sean Newman from being able to, because you're familiar with the Sean Newman podcast. Yep. He's another Alberta. Right. So anyways, and then you mentioned they were labeled guerrillas. So we are already being called separatists. That's right. So now there's this.
That's a derogatory term. That's
right. So they're putting us into the othering category. And now they're using as another means for labeling, we are getting the Chinese influence in all of our politics, so that instead of it's another way of saying communists. So now that you're a paid agent of China, or you're a China sympathizer, or you're on China's payroll.
You're going right down my checklist.
Yeah, that exactly. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, and I wrote all that down, is I want my fellow citizens to understand that all of this is a magic trick. This is an Operation Gladio playbook, and it is our CSIS. In fact, I would argue that we probably have CIA already operating within the movement. I believe that we probably would already have Australia, because like the one thing about all of these, I remember you had a conversation and somebody had brought up, oh well, that's this propagandizing of the people through the Operation Mockingbird. Well, Obama had peeled the Smith-Mundt Act, but it was like, that was way later. They were doing this thing regardless of whatever the legislation was. They weren't asking permission. They just effing did it.
Yeah. So I think that, and that's a brilliant point. 1948, Smith-Mundt Act. 1948. We had congressional hearings in 1975 that revealed 400 people were on the payroll posing as journalists of the CIA.
That's the church committee, right?
Yeah. Well, the church, I think it was the Pike. There was like two of them that went on almost simultaneously. One was the House and one was the Senate.
Right.
But they found out that ABC was basically owned by a proprietary of the CIA. That's one of the three major networks at the time. The Washington Post, Katharine Graham, the Graham family, 100% checked with the CIA on everything they wrote. New York Times, same thing. So that was when we had the Smith-Mundt Act, right? Okay, so who went to jail for violating it? Absolutely no one. So every time I see that, it pisses me off. So I have to bring out my, yeah. Tell me again, who went to jail under it?
Right.
Nobody.
And we have the
So
CBC, which we know it's actually openly, at least this much I will say about our oppressors up here. They're openly telling us that they run our media because CBC is actually funded by the Canadian government, which when you know that the top 5 banks of Canada are all money laundering operations, they've all been brought under charges or fines or suspicion thereof of these charges.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, so since we're probably one of the largest money laundering hubs in the spider's web in conjunction with your Cayman Island, offshore banking, also laundering operations. What would make us think that we're like, what would make them stop? Why? Like they're incentivized to keep up this type of behavior.
And I would offer that it is more likely MI6 that is involved. Not that the CIA doesn't have vested interest, but you are a major resource of natural resources to the kingdom. And that puts you in the crosshairs of MI6 and the Crown itself. So not to say that the CIA wouldn't help their dad out, but they're definitely a family.
Yeah, now, one thing so earlier when you were talking about the connection between military, and I want to bring some parallels because there are direct parallels for people, and between military intelligence and the police. The thing with, I don't know, maybe not everybody knows, but CSIS, what Dad has alluded to, is Canada's Security and Intelligence Service. So it is literally our CIA and MI6.
Yes.
That's
They
what
even
it is.
put the word intelligence in there.
They
That's
did.
nice
They're
of them.
not hiding it. Exactly. Right. So and that came from the RCMP after the FLQ, because like Dad said, RCMP got exposed for doing things, and then so they couldn't allow. Exactly.
Rebrand, yeah.
They've rebranded and switched it because they couldn't allow the RCMP to continue doing those things, kind of like Operation Mockingbird. They got exposed by the church committees and the other commissions that were held at the time. And so you move the operation to somewhere else. You just rebrand it. It's like same with NED. The NED, it supposedly ended, and so a lot of Americans were happy, but a lot of the policies...
USAID.
That too, yeah.
No, the National Endowment for Democracy is still fully functioning and fully funded.
Exactly. Yeah. Some people were saying it was ended, and me and Macy did an episode when we had a solo podcast. We were like, okay, we just want everybody to see the funding. It's still there. So nothing's ended. And even on the USAID, I mean, this is one thing, a point that would be very good for anybody that's in high school, because we have friends that are in high school currently.
Which, by the way, if you're listening to this, you're the coolest fucking high schooler I know.
Right, but anybody our age, the thing is, I still very freshly remember all the propaganda I was given in high school. Mm-hmm. Even being an online student, the curriculum is the same, which is why I still don't advocate for online, because a bad curriculum is a bad curriculum. It doesn't matter if you do it online or in an institution or a prison.
Sorry about that.
It's fine. But the point is, they sold us.
Let me say one thing about that. You had your dad.
Oh yeah.
And you didn't have all of the people around you that had bought into that further corrupts you. Mm-hmm. At least you were doing it in a freedom patriot household, not surrounded by all of the other people that were brainwashed. And that is a big deal. Yes,
we weren't awake yet, but I get what you're saying. At the time, I still thought, Canadian identity was, this is the point, NATO peacekeeping missions. Isn't it great that Canada sends our NATO peacekeepers to go and help all these and implement democracy in other countries? And this is what they still tell us. Like, that's a part of the Canadian identity, is the NATO peacekeepers. And this is what we do because we are a peacekeeping nation, is what they actually give us in our textbooks still to this day. And so that is one thing that, looking into USAID, NED, NATO, understanding their operations, that they're all really just Gladio operations to do these subversions. That's what you are idealizing. And that's what you are associating Canada with. And you're absolutely right that to associate Canada with NATO, but you don't understand what NATO is. And therefore, you still don't understand what Canada is.
They're like, why is Egmont in Canada?
Yeah. Well, because you're a peacekeeper.
Yeah.
So to your point, let me just put a little whipped cream and a cherry on top of what you just said. When you understand that NATO operations actually go in and overthrow governments and do very nefarious things, the first 16 years of NATO's civilian side was former Nazis.
Yes.
Yep.
The hierarchy.
That would be Cynthia's work, yeah.
And they house the two entities, the Clandestine Planning Committee and the Allied Clandestine Committee. They plan the Gladio operations at NATO headquarters to do all of these domestic terror operations against the citizens of the countries that belong to NATO, in addition to projecting those same trained assassins onto other countries and overthrowing their governments. So what I want to drive home is the peacekeeping was, you go in, the Canadian peacekeepers, after the country has been overthrown, and you are responsible for sustaining the military dictatorship that has been installed, or the fake government that has been installed after the overthrow. So in the case of many of the French colonies in Africa, this is a very generic way of looking at it, but this is kind of a summary. You had very tribal people in fake geography lines that were set up post World War II. And these fake country nation states that were created were purposely drawn to include warring factions. Now, if you were an honest negotiator post World War II, you would have created countries that were cohesive so that they had the best opportunity to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know that Middle Africa is comprised of this major tribe, you would have drawn the geography lines around where that tribe resided so that they could be a functioning, cohesive. But if you wanted to make sure that you could destabilize that country, that continent, at any opportunity in the future, you would have drawn the lines like they were drawn, because they cross different tribes. So this one tribe will be in this country and this country, and they're diabolical enemies of this tribe sitting over here. So we're going to put them both in the same country. And that way,
strategy of tension.
Correct. The red ant, black ant. At any time, take that jar, and I can do a false flag of dressing up like this tribe and attacking this tribe, and then they just go at each other. And then I can control whoever's sitting on top of that. So I pay for him, and he's a figurehead. And anytime I want to shake that up, then I can do that. And in many cases, what the French did in particular is they would go in and put the minority tribe in these fake countries in power. And the French military was the one that served as the Praetorian Guard over the large tribe. And they would allow this minority tribe that had been at war with this majority tribe for 100 years. And they would let them kill them at will. Would
an example of that be what happened with Rwanda?
Yes.
Okay. Just checking.
So you have then, when the French pull out, in theory, now you have this majority tribe that's thoroughly pissed off. And they're coming for blood because you took their blood. And then the French sits back and wringles their hand and goes, oh, those poor Black people, they can't be leaders. They don't know how. They're so inept. We're going to have to go back in and help.
Mm.
And in rides the peacekeepers.
Right.
And that was the setup for the Canadians to come in and keep the peace. There was never
and
any
Australians and New Zealanders. It's funny how the Commonwealth the countries
Five Eyes,
send
yeah,
in
again. Yeah, if people don't know what the Five Eyes are, you know, it was a signal agreement, I think is what it was called, the signal agreement, and it happened, I believe, in the 1940s and or maybe early 1950s. But that's, again, your Commonwealth countries. It's no coincidence that they're, you know, like the British colonies and stuff like that. But, you know, countries that, in order to pretend that they respect the rights of their citizens, you know, they say, I won't spy on my citizens. So what do? They create an agreement to, okay, we'll spy on one another's citizens and then exchange information. So and Canada is a part of that, New Zealand, Australia.
the U.S.
Yeah, the U.S. So that's another facade when you look at certain things. Like, we were just on a podcast with Nat and the guy, and they were asking about the Constitution, because if Alberta separates, we got to create our own Constitution. And they were like, you know, not spying on your citizens, digital privacy, having it in there and all that jazz. It's like, that's all fine and dandy, but there's a reason that, okay, if they don't do it, they will create another organization or agreement and have somebody else do it for them. And you alluded to clandestine operations, and then, you know, assassin training. And again, in Canada, this is something people wouldn't know. Macy alluded to Camp X. Camp X was created in 1941. And so that's prior to the CIA. So when she said, because the CIA was 1947. So Camp X was clandestine training in psychological operations and all the jazz, because at the time, before the CIA, was the OSS, Office of Strategic Services. And at the time, I've heard people say the OSS wasn't all that bad, and they're not wrong. They had
They were bad from the beginning.
I think the message was more so not all the officers might have known that they were in that bad.
Right.
Some of them definitely, the higher ups.
It was,
like,
who was it that said it? Was it Stephen Murray, or was it Brian Holt? Somebody said in the military, it's like, once you have 3 stars on your hat, then you know, like, they're at the top of the hierarchy and they're bad. But if you're 1 star, then you're still succumbing to the compartmentalization, where they don't give you everything. And so you have the deniability, because, you know, they haven't let you in on all the secrets. And they claimed, some people have said the OSS had the same thing at the time. So not everybody, unless you were at the top of the hierarchy, but you had the lower people that they would purposely not give all the information. But so the people that didn't have the information, or the areas in the OSS where they couldn't do psychological operations or assassin training, what did they do? They created Camp X to do it for them and train the people in OSS that later on went into the CIA. And same with the FBI. There were certain sections of the FBI that they weren't legally supposed to do. And Camp X in Canada, in Ottawa, would train these people and then send them back into the FBI. And then those people trained and went into the CIA. And that was done here in Canada. And so, again, keep in mind all these, if one person says, oh, this can't do it, they'll create another entity. And so Camp X was created because that is Canada at its core. From the peacekeeping, which is all the peacekeeping did was, it was an arm and a branch to help facilitate the foreign interference that entities in the international syndicate, as Colonel Towner says, their plan. We were their little...
We're a proxy.
We're a proxy. It was the henchmen. That's what Canada was. Camp X was an operation to do that henchman thing. Go ahead.
I wouldn't even say that you were the henchmen. You were the people that were to go in and maintain the status quo after the ant jar had been shaken up.
Yes.
So after the killing is done, you guys were to go in and maintain the status quo, supposedly under the guise of stopping the killing and ensuring whatever peace agreement had been agreed to. But the peace agreement that had been agreed to was propping up a selected leader from the international syndicate that had all of the tenets of the MI6, CIA surrounded it and protected it while you guys went in and kept the people at bay. But let me talk about the OSS for just a second, because I will respectfully disagree with my fellow podcasters. When the OSS was formed, William Donovan was a Wall Street banker.
Is he known as Wild Bill?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
He's from Buffalo, New York. And if you know anything, if you do any research about Buffalo, Buffalo is a very, very interesting town. It was a Gilded Age hotspot for a lot of very corrupt oligarchs. If you go to, we were just in Buffalo like a year and a half ago, they have a train station that puts Union Station in DC and New York on a even kill. So it's humongous. It's grand. It's something that is like, it's been left in disarray. They had set up a heritage kind of a historical thing to revamp it, but it was of a grandeur level that you would have never imagined belonged in Buffalo, New York, except Buffalo, because of its location on the water there, was an extremely important city back in those days. There was some very wealthy people. As a matter of fact, Wild Bill Donovan's wife, I believe her first name was Ruth, was from one of the most richest families in Buffalo at the time. And so Wild Bill Donovan went through Wall Street and picked bankers and lawyers, bankers and lawyers, bankers and lawyers. OSS was set up as their Praetorian Guard. There was no good guys in the OSS. They were all directly attached to the oligarchs.
Is this like another Solomon and Cromwell?
They picked, well, Alan Dulles is from Sullivan and Cromwell. He was part of the OSS.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly it. But Sullivan and Cromwell was not the only one. They were one of the most prominent ones.
Okay.
So you have bankers and lawyers primarily. Lots of other people, but bankers and lawyers. There were some PR people because, you know, you have to keep, you have to create the propaganda.
Narratives.
You have to do the psychological warfare. So these people knew exactly what they were doing.
Okay.
These were not innocent people. These were people that had been guarding the oligarchs as lawyers and bankers for decades before they were recruited into the OSS. And so their purpose in World War II was to guard the investments of these oligarchs in Europe. They were part of the intelligence that decided who got bombed and who didn't. There's a reason why IG Farben never got bombed. Okay? So there's a reason why certain bankers that were in Nazi Germany didn't go to the guillotine or to the hanging rope or convicted at Nuremberg, even if they were put on trial.
So these might have been the people then that had the wherewithal to help push something like the operation that gave us the movie Monument Men, where they were so that film is based on a military unit that actually went in and tried to get like all the art, any type of precious metals, cultural significance. I believe it's like George Clooney, John Goodman. These were all people that were in it. They tried to make it like look spoofy, almost like Men Who Stare at Goats, so to speak. But the whole point is that if they were looking to be able to get the assets, because most of the time, especially if you got bankers involved, the assets got to hit the books. And so one of the things about like that we know that Canada, like the best bank is keeping the oil in the ground. The best bank is keeping the gold in the ground. They always want us to keep our natural resources in the ground so that it can be utilized at a time when they feel it's necessary for their agenda, and or they can keep it on the books for being able to leverage up to, say, help, sustain the European Central Bank. Because that's clearly what Carney's trying to do with Canada.
Well, let me also say that they're not going to extract gold from Canada and pay you a living wage when they can extract gold from Venezuela and pay somebody $2 a day.
Yeah, they'll wait till they have us in a place of desperation where then we will be compelled into slave labor.
Yeah, absolutely. That your resources, and it's the same way in the United States. These companies do not financially benefit from extracting resources at home when they can they can overthrow a country and extract resources from that country at slave labor by sabotaging their union efforts. It's just not going to happen. That's why we offshored, a lot of our industrial capability to third world countries, and China for that matter. Because it's economically more profitable for the oligarchs to do that than pay. We only have unions here for window dressing, because when we go into another country and they have a union, we think they have the same kind of a union that we do. They don't, because their union is controlled through the National Endowment for Democracy pot of money with infiltrators that are in no way representing the people in those third world countries.
Yeah, I think your unions, and same with ours, are set up actually as vote purchasing. That they use it for electoral
they do that on the municipal
manipulation.
level here.
Oh, for sure, and the U.S.
They also use the union pensions as money laundering opportunities to launder it through investment banking, where they all get kickbacks based on your savings. So yeah, the whole
Epstein.
point of having these unions here is to give the veneer of a democracy and how it operates. So just to your point that you were making earlier about the persona of a peacekeeper, if we can project this image so that people in America don't travel internationally a lot, and when they do, they go to touristy spots, they don't figure out what's going on in countries. They just assume that if a particular country has a union and they have industrial capability, that it looks just like ours, and it absolutely does not. And so they will sit on resources as long as possible until they've enslaved all of us, and they can work us like they do third world countries.
So in your experience, just for an example, because I guess, I'll have to obviously reconsider my axiom about the OSS, which then if that's the case, then I would also just kind of like to offer sort of maybe I believe that you could help. So you found yourself doing a full military career. And I even heard, I believe it was General Holt make a similar statement. And even Ian Burlingame has made mention that you guys were moving along your careers, but basically you were treated like mushrooms and just fed shit and kept in the dark on overall arching sort of scenarios. So, I mean, I would think that if I got to ask each and every one of you, and hopefully one day I will through this type of conversation, did you find yourself doing that classic British meme where the two Brits that were dressed in German suits go, "Fritz, are we the baddies?" Was that a scenario that actually was a physical reality for you?
After I retired.
So you never saw it or sniffed it at all during your entire military career?
No, we were the good guys. Why would I think otherwise? We are spreading peace and democracy all around the world.
So you bought the shit that they fed you.
It's all you have available,
right?
So if you especially once I became an officer, you are kept so busy. My last 3 years on active duty as a commander, I had a whole bunch of geographically separated units. I traveled each and every week somewhere around the world. I had a detachment in Germany. I had a detachment in Japan. I was everywhere, Hawaii. And you are kept so busy and you're fed a constant stream of what they refer to as professional military education. They sent me for a year to get a master's degree in strategic studies. I
Right.
traveled to Vietnam, to Laos, to Cambodia, to Thailand. And there you're surrounded, you're given a country brief every stop by a CIA person. You get to meet the ambassador. And so again, you're just fed this information. The commander's reading list that comes out every year, there's like 15 books. And if you want to be, appear to be smart at the officers club on Friday night, you read those books and people talk about those books. As a matter of fact, when I got to Air War College, just about every book that was for this entire year, and I didn't even know ahead of time what they were, I had read almost every one of them because I love reading. But what you read is things that feed what your perception of the world is. Like you read Eisenhower's biography, you read, later on, Condoleezza Rice's biography. And so they're telling you a story.
Wow, this is like a military UNESCO.
Yes. Yes. And so there are people that are on active duty that start going, this doesn't seem right. But for people like myself, who was never read into any of these big, high, and even when you're read into a particular operation, you're read in with just your piece.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't know what the guy sitting next to you who's doing another piece of it. You don't even know what they're doing.
It was like the Manhattan Project. They didn't know they were building an atomic bomb. The scientists were like, "Oh, they just need me to do this cool
compartmentalization."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so I had a TSSCI. I had access to things, but again, you're in a mindset that you're the good guys. Those people really are communist, or those people really are radical Islamists in the operations that you're involved in. And that's your perception of things. So it was not until 3.5 years ago when I stumbled across Anthony Sutton's book that he describes the Wall Street bankers and the City of London bankers funding Hitler, the Bolshevik Revolution, and FDR's presidency, that my entire world just went right upside down. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why would those people who, we've all grown up thinking, they're in the arts, they do all of these wonderful things, they have a foundation. Why would they fund communism and fascism? Well, then you read Joseph Farrell's book called The Third Way, and he explains it very articulately that those are the ants. These are the black ants and these are the red ants. And if these things can terrorize you, as they psychologically did to us with communism and fascism, then they can keep you in the middle because you never want to do anything behaviorally to put yourself in a fascist light or a communist light. So they can keep you all right here in the middle.
And yet they're both constructs of the very same entity.
Correct. And so then I had an advantage at that point because I had read all of that material. And then of course, in one of those books, they talked, I think it was Joseph Farrell's book, he mentioned something towards the end of the book about stay-behind units. And again, being military, I'm like, that sounds like a military thing. Why have I never heard of stay-behind units? What the hell is that?
Right.
And I was like, I'm just going to look that up. And I'm like, holy shit.
Damn you for being curious.
Yeah. And then Operation Gladio, because that was the Italian one, the only one that had actually ever been exposed completely, not done away with, but exposed. And I found Paul Williams' book. I got to interview him a couple of times.
Yeah, I saw those. Yep.
Yeah. And I was like, what the hell? And, I've been on a 3.5 year journey ever since. And once you the point that I was going to make is having all of this information rattling around in my head, I now had a body to put it on.
Exactly.
So in my early interviews, I specifically described this. It was like walking into, like if you're a biology major, it's like walking into the lab the first time and you just have the bone skeleton hanging there. And they tell you have to put the heart on it, and you have to put the liver in the right place, and you have to put the veins and connect them. And that's what I felt like I was doing for the last 3.5 years, is building this body out and putting all of the connecting pieces and drawing the bloodlines like the yarn on the detective board, of all of these pieces that connect to each other, and the people that were involved in, putting little tapes on the yarn. This operation happened with these people. And that's literally what I've been doing for the last 3.5 years, is putting that whole thing together. Once you can get kind of the skeleton semi-formed, it's the scariest damn thing that has ever happened to me in my life. And then I felt compelled. I was about 6 months in, and I was posting over on Truth Social, but I felt compelled. I have to have a bigger audience. I have to get this information out. It literally changes the way you look at the world completely. And it's the very reason why none of this is mainstream news. Just today, one of the big, truth tellers, exposers is Data Republican on X. And she's done a lot of awesome work. I made a post today. She had said something about the Chamber of Commerce being behind something. And I was like, yeah, that's National Endowment for Democracy. They have a chamber pot, a union pot, a Republican pot of money, and a Democrat pot of money. And they collectively work together to overthrow governments. And her comment was, the Chamber of Commerce has a pot of money and National Endowment for Democracy? What? WTF? And then Mike Lee made a comment. Senator Mike Lee made a comment on it. And I'm sitting and I'm like, I've only been saying this for like 3 years now.
Right.
One of the first pieces that I put together was USAID, the Office of Public Safety, the Office of Trade. I mean, if you go back in my Alpha Warrior shows, we did that as one of the first 20 shows we did was the Office of Public Safety, because that was like mind blowing that we're literally going into countries under the Orwellian name of Office of Public Safety and setting up black site torture prisons.
Yeah, no, it's so funny you say that, because I mean, earlier, you alluded to, you said Canada wasn't necessarily the henchman, we were the status quo maintenance. Though we did via, even because during the 1860s, the Civil War and the Confederates versus the North, here in Canada, we had bases in Montreal and Toronto that were training and supplying funds and money for the Confederate armies. And that's where John Wilkes Booth, the assassinator of Abraham Lincoln, trained here in Montreal. He went from Montreal to the U.S. to commit the assassination. So, and not a lot of Canadians know that. Again, we're painted as that very thing, the NED. We are the peacekeepers. Meanwhile, we literally train for this other purpose and then go and implement assassinations, and then we train people like the CIA and OS. Yeah.
So I didn't mean to minimize.
No. Yeah,
in some of those, Camp X is the best example, because they literally had it was a terrorist training camp. That's what it was.
Yeah.
It was training people to be assassins and all kinds of nefarious things. It was one of the original ones, as a matter of fact. So yeah. Canada, also, I did not know this. Canada was used as the thoroughfare to get Trotsky out of New York City back into Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, that was the Royal Canadian, what do you call it? The police.
Yeah, Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Yep.
The RCMP,
Yeah,
who I do not believe are assets to the people. As far as like what the institution is, I couldn't tell you which ones are good guys or bad guys because I don't know enough of them, and that's each conscious person that's in that field will have to wrestle with that themselves. But I know that taken as a whole, it is not an ally to the people of Alberta and the nation that we would like to develop.
Right.
They gotta go. This is like having this conversation. Like I saw the meme where you got Leonardo DiCaprio just going, staring at the TV, right? It's like this is reality that ends up happening when you actually have to start doing the cognitive heavy lifting necessary to kind of understand where you are on the battlefield.
Well, and it's like the parallels that you've painted too. It's like I didn't think about Camp X, when I thought of Gladio and Condor, just because I've been listening to you and Matthew Ehret for so long, and Canada really is painted as this, even in the Civil War, Canada was neutral. We were labeled and called neutral. We didn't take a stance, yet we were behind the scenes funding the Confederate Army. Probably also the North, let's be real. But the point being, I didn't think of the RCMP or CSIS or FLQ or Pierre. You don't think of Canada as this thing. We're the good guys that say A and sorry a lot. That's really what they paint us. So when you start talking and label
syrup
and you started with Chile and then, Cuba, and it's like you paint the parallels, and then my mind just goes, oh my God, right, I forgot. And then it helps me because I had started with Matthew Ehret's work and he talked about Camp X and the RCMP and CSIS, but I didn't necessarily connect it to being a part of, you get this kind of British entity, but it's the playbook, and we were built on their playbook. Our identity is to be the maintenance. That's what Canada is. That's all it is. And they only gave us an identity, and it's that quote from John Alfred Milner. That's his name? Lord Alfred Milner, thank you. When he said that there were three options when they were looking at Canada becoming a nation. And he said the Canada at the time, don't
have
BC,
to paraphrase. I got it right here. As between the three possibilities of the future: 1, closer imperial union; 2, union with the U.S., and 3, independence. I believe definitively that number 2 is the real danger. I do not think the Canadians themselves are aware of it. They are wonderfully immature in political reflection on big issues and hardly realize how powerful the influences are. On the other hand, I see little danger to ultimate imperial unity in Canadian nationalism, in quotes, air quotes. On the contrary, I think the very same sentiment makes a great many, especially of the younger Canadians, vigorously and even bumptiously assertive of their independence, proud and boastful of the greatness and future of their country, and so forth, would lend themselves, tactfully handled, to an enthusiastic acceptance of imperial unity on the basis of partner states, provinces as we know them now. This tendency is, therefore, in my opinion, rather to be encouraged, not only as a safeguard against Americanization, in air quotes, but as actually making, in the long run, for a union of all the Britons.
Yeah, so that was their intention for us, and it is,
it's still their intention.
It's clearly still, because at the beginning we talked about, the crown and the loyalty too. It's like you are still being loyal to the ideas and the plan of Lord Alfred Milner, who is, this Fabian person, and back in
socialist,
right? Fabian socialist.
Milner's kindergarten, right?
Yeah,
downstream of Cecil Rhodes. Which is also downstream of some of the first Gladio operations, because the Boer War was where Churchill got to witness firsthand, watching how the Dutch and the Boers, and how that played out. And that's where we get concentration camps, which I'm sure Canada will see again. They'll stuff a bunch of Albertans in them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So this whole podcast has just been a big mind blown. And
yep. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
I have so many more questions. My brain the whole time is just I know what I want to explore next time. And I'm really excited for if we can get you and Cynthia at some point. And I'm there's some more in-depth stuff that we can go to. I took notes the whole time.
Yeah, me too. Okay.
So also, I just want to say the other piece of Canada's role in this whole thing is it doesn't matter whether we were talking about the opium out of the Golden Triangle, the Golden Crescent, whatever. Canada was the northern route into the United States in each of those operations, where Miami was the southern route. The entire eastern part of Canada has played a vital role in the CIA drug trafficking
Right.
piece of this.
Right.
That's one of the
And if
things
people
we
also
need to
want to
talk about.
understand the lie that we are told as Canadian citizens about fentanyl from China, when you actually do your downstream homework on this, and you can find receipts, because if you end up doing any type of research and you find that any type of cyber footprint ends with Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou,
Hong Kong.
or Hongzhou, you're like, yeah, so those were also all CIA hubs at one point in time. And putting out the material, India puts out more material that's base product for fentanyl than China does. Because China actually listened to Trump, and they actually took their foot off the gas pedal for providing all those products. But it's coming into Canada, getting filtered down, but it ain't the Chinese. This is still your standard opium war tactic that the British would happily do to destabilize the United States. They would happily still run this policy. So what would make you think that they would stop?
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. And even the fentanyl coming across the southern border, it is being produced in Mexico based on chemicals that are used for multi-purposes.
Right.
So if you have a country buying a particular chemical, once it reaches your shores, it's like buying a gun and it's telling somebody that it's the gun's problem when somebody gets shot dead with it. No. You had a chemical that has multiple uses that were brought into your country, and then you chose as a country
to manufacture this.
Allow the production of fentanyl, because you certainly can trace those things. And you know what chemicals they are. You have the ability to trace who's buying them. And the person that exported those chemicals, once they hit your port, it's on you.
Well, once it hits the port, if we look at how the East India Company and even the Dutch India Company ports, the Venetians understood that. The Venetians had information centers at all the ports. You could track all the product that came in and out. That was the intelligence operation of the Venetian Empire. The Dutch trading company did that. The British company did that. That's how they managed to do the opium wars. So once again, why would we think that this successful formula that has made its way through time out of all these different intelligence agency operations in all of these different empires that are feeding oligarchs, why would that be any different right now? Why do we need to sit back and submit ourselves to these manufactured enemies? People saying that, oh yeah, China's just getting back at you for doing all that. It's like, oh my goodness, like how small-minded are you? You're the enemy you're looking for. First off, it's in your skull between the hemispheres, and it's in your own backyard. Clean up your house.
Mm-hmm. My last little thoughts and tidbits to kind of like, I guess, close it for home for me is like a lot of the times people my age are always like, why are you paying attention to like geopolitics and what's going on in the world? Like that has nothing to do with us here. And and like, of course, we're laughing because we're like, dummies, but like but the thing is that hits me when I'm listening to conversations like this is, first of all, yes, we're in a very historically like significant time of Alberta wanting to separate, and unfortunately young people just haven't been around long enough to see the, I guess, abuses in the context as to why this is much larger than they even think it is, as it just must be another political trend. It's like, no, there's generations that came before you that clearly have been trying to fight this for a long time, but now we're here, and now it could be very well a potentiality. And so one of the things is dependency, I think, like codependency is, I think, what the oligarchs definitely use to thrive and survive. Because it's like, if you are responsible for your own resources, for your own sovereignty, it's no different than, let's say, for example, you're out in the middle of the bush and you know how to survive by a fire, and you know how to hunt, and you know how to do all these things. You have skills that are your assets that help you to thrive in the world. Well, it's the same thing as a country. It's like if you have the ability to develop and refine your own things, manufacture your own things, it's showing that if I was alone with myself, I would be okay, right? As in if and that's like a worst case scenario if all else fails, right? Like we can come back to something, we can come back to ourselves. And so when I'm looking at like the other countries and geopolitics and why we're trying to pay attention, it's this Gladio stuff as well to look and go like, hold on, like there are other countries that are suffering in the exact same way that Alberta has been, that Canada has been, because it's also the victimizer, but the people are the victim. And so when you see those patterns start to emerge, you're like, well, then how do we gain our own version of sovereignty? And also, what other countries are trying to do it themselves? Because if we think that we're the only ones that came up with the original idea of, oh, I want to leave tyranny, it's like, no. And so what are the other countries that are trying to do that thing? And then you'll see that natural alliances might be starting to form, and it's trying to figure out, well, how do I get good friends and how do I make good friends? Because even when, America was coming into its form, a lot of other countries like Russia, Japan, Germany, they were starting to adopt the American system of political economy, because they were like, oh wow, like look at the new ideas that this I guess rising country and colonies are starting to spring forward. And so they were like, well, how do we start attaining that? And so it's going to be a similar thing, or at least I hope it will be a similar thing, where we're looking and we're paying. That's why I pay attention. It's like, the answer to your question, why I pay attention, is because these places that are trying to, I guess, put forward a different model that is very, very different from what we've been living, which is this tyrannical system, which has been perpetuated over such a long time. Again, like it's not a fad, it's not a political trend. Like this is history, this is context, right? Then we have to pay attention to it in order to figure out, how do we get out of that? How do we make good friends? And then we bring it back to ourselves, where if we were able to, like, you can't get rid of the fact that there's alliances either, right? I mean, even Canada is already quite dependent on the U.S. for trade and quite dependent on the U.S. for military protection, right? So it's like, you're not going to eliminate that. So you need to figure out, well, how do we navigate it so that way, when you're being labeled as a traitor, are you actually? When you're being labeled as a communist, are they actually, right? And then trying to navigate that. And when there's those, I guess, sort of facades of, tension, civil war, all of that, it's like, well, who curated it? Because most likely the person who curated it is the person that's going to say, here, let me come and help you, and let me come and save you. And so that's
Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah, that was my 2 bits on that.
Where can people find you?
On X every day. Is that my Substack?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Colonel Tanner's newsletter, and then
Colonel's Corner on Rumble and on my Substack.
Yes, she has a fantastic Rumble channel.
Yes, she does.
And all the links will be in this description, of course. And then, her X for those who want to look at some fiery knowledge while they're poop scrolling.
Yes.
Talking smack, laying it down. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's always appreciated. We know that we're little guys in the big scheme of things, but podcasters unite.
We're all important.
Yep.
And without further ado, everybody, this has been another episode of At Home with Holmes.